All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Talk Data to Me with Lookout. Today, we're talking about some challenges with VPN. This is a show where we like to talk about all things data security, and that is a critical part of data security these days. I'm happy to have Tricia from our team at Lookout here. And what we're really going to focus on is VPN, some of their challenges when it comes to scalability, to performance, and most importantly, obviously, security. So Tricia, great to have you on. How's it going today?
It's going great. Thank you for having me, Hank.
Yeah, always a pleasure to chat. And before we dive into it, I just want to, kind of level set with the audience here. We're not just going to be talking about VPNs themselves, but really we're going to be talking about how that rapid evolution of the security landscape and obviously remote work have really pushed organizations, I think everyone can agree on this, to think about, how they maybe slowly phase out some or all of their VPN capabilities or solutions, honestly, in most cases, and phase in zero trust network access or ZTNA. Part of the reason that I say that is because actually, according to Gartner, by 2025, which is almost just a year away, at least 70%, as the stat says here, of new remote access deployments will be mainly served by ZTNA, which is actually a 60% increase over the course of 4 years. So this is definitely a trend. And Tricia, let's kick things off here with something that you and I were actually talking about earlier today, which is this idea of continuous use in the context of VPN. Can you explain to our viewers, to our listeners, what that means and why VPNs aren't necessarily designed for it?
Yeah, absolutely. And before we get into all of this, I want to reiterate something you said earlier, Hank, which is that we are not going to talk about ripping and replacing VPNs in favor of ZTNA, because that's just not realistic for most organizations. So everything we end up discussing today will help people understand how to take a phased approach and why they should plan to make this change in the coming months and years. So, yeah, taking a piecemeal approach to the transition from VPN to ZTN is something businesses can definitely do. In fact, on your point of continuous use, one of the biggest challenges with VPNs has been magnified in recent years, which is that these solutions aren't designed to connect your entire workforce at once. That was a huge pain point at the start of COVID when organizations had to enable everyone to work from home immediately. But in previous times, like pre-pandemic, before COVID, you might have had a handful of employees connecting to the corporate WAN at once, but only on an occasional basis. So think of, like a snow day when everyone is just stuck working from home, and that's when you would connect to your VPN. But and that's when that was a use case where VPNs actually worked. But with pervasive remote work becoming the norm, many enterprises are now realizing that their VPN servers are subject to excessive loads that negatively impact performance and user experience.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, and I think that also, the idea of a snow day in Southern California, where you are, is a little bit different than where I am in Boston. But you guys get 2 inches of snow and everything shuts down. We got to get a foot. But I think you're spot on with all of that, and I think the ideal state really is to enable that continuous use at scale, right? Because really, you want to be able to do that without your workforce even knowing what's changed. I mean, the experience is so smooth that they don't really notice the difference, right? Regardless of how they're connecting, what they're connecting through, what they're connecting to or from, all those factors that play into it. And this brings us to our second point. And from your experience, you have a lot of experience in this specific use case in this field. What have you seen as some of those scalability and usability challenges with traditional VPNs?
So when you're dealing with a globally distributed remote workforce, which is, as we just discussed, is sort of becoming the norm, the truth is that the complexity associated with adding new VPNs makes them very difficult and cumbersome to scale.
Mhm.
So scalability is always an issue when it comes to VPNs as a legacy technology, because to scale to a large number of users, network architect teams, they must keep adding new VPN appliances. These are data center based solutions, right? So, and this adds to obviously the cost, the complexity, the effort. Um, so to that end, like if you're dealing with a growing workforce, but you have fewer appliances, and then you have issues with VPN overload because of that, then too, adding VPN appliances or VPN concentrators also results in the extra cost and complexity of implementing and configuring additional hardware. So no matter at what way you look at it, VPNs are not only complex when it comes to the scale to handle scale, but also in terms of the cost and complexity of implementation. And quite frankly, even after making the investment, when it comes to providing that superior user experience, VPNs simply don't hit the mark. Because with VPNs, all user traffic must be backhauled to the data center. It does not directly go to the internet. And this results in a lot of like unpredictable issues like with performance. There are significant latency challenges.
Mhm.
And when it comes to the user, the person who's logging onto the VPN to access the corporate WAN, it's simply not such a great user experience.
Right, and we just talked about how you want to make things smooth for employees, and that's what you just talked about is really when things get painful for employees, and I think everyone can agree that when things start to get painful, they start to figure out what workarounds they could use, and that's when a lot of the real challenges start. We see this a lot with shadow IT, right? Especially more in kind of like the SaaS apps conversation, where if IT hasn't vetted a certain app that I really like to use, and it helps me get work done better. And the one that they have vetted is, doesn't really work with me. Then maybe I'll just go off and use the other one. But suddenly, there's sensitive data moving kind of outside that sphere of control that IT and security try to maintain these days. And that's an ongoing challenge, right? That's something that's probably one of the hardest challenges that we see. So when it comes to what you're talking about, it's just that pain point of, lack of smooth access experience and all that really gets
Mhm.
tough. And so at this point, we've covered kind of the scalability challenge, the usability challenge. Now let's get into the actual security challenges. What are some of those that you see around VPNs?
Yeah, actually, to be honest, Frank, this one is actually pretty straightforward. So VPNs are inherently based on implicit trust. And so what that means is that when you connect to a VPN, as an authorized user, you get unrestricted access to all apps and data within the network. It's unrestricted.
Mhm.
Sometimes, in fact, even those apps and data that users get access to, even those apps and data that they really shouldn't be able to access. It's like almost like opening the door to your house and giving the entrant access to everything that's in your house, your bedroom, your closet, everything, right? So that's the mechanism. So this almost creates a single point of failure, which is the employee's credentials. When we look at the modern kill chain is evolving such that threat actors prefer phishing for credentials
Mhm.
rather than trying to brute force their way into an organization's network infrastructure, right? So, so this enables them to gain access. They are able to move laterally and then tap into sensitive data with that unbridled access that VPNs grant. So I would say that with unrestricted access, your data residing in private apps, the apps themselves, and the network, the entire value chain, right,
Mhm.
all become vulnerable to cyber threats. With VPNs, there's absolutely no way to continuously authenticate access so that you can sort of securely do that. securely authenticate access to apps and data.
Yeah, and I think it's also, your point about this sort of unrestricted, unbridled, whatever word you want to use to talk about the access to everything, is really, I mean, that's to me, that's really the scary. I shouldn't say scary, but that's the thing that is most worrisome. And there's really there's no way to provision access, to your point, right? There's no reason that I should have access to our company finances, for example, right?
Exactly.
Right. And the same way that, someone in finance should have access to our threat intelligence data. It's just all these crossovers here. And so when you think about it in that context, I think that being able to really provision that access, some people think about it in terms of microsegmentation, being able to say, okay, this person or this role, maybe they do it based on role, should be able to access these certain apps and data. But yeah, to your point, when you give someone the keys of the kingdom, basically all of a sudden, the entire organization's under fire, especially when it comes to what you talked about with the modern kill chain, some of those more modern phishing tactics. What devices are they targeting to steal those credentials? Are those credentials being bought on the dark web? There's so many ways for an attacker to get in, basically under the guise of being a legit employee. That if you're just relying on VPN, that's that's a little that can be tough. So beyond access securities that we're talking about now, so being able to log in, being able to get to all this stuff, what about actually protecting the data? I think that one thing that people do a lot is they lump data access and data protection to one challenge, and tell me if you agree, when in reality they're actually two unique challenges.
No, you're right. Actually, well, speaking of data protection, and I think more people should understand the VPNs in context of whether or not they protect data. And one thing everyone needs to know is that VPNs are not purpose built to secure and control data sharing across users, apps, and devices. They simply give a level of access, right? Access to everything. The VPNs are actually, they were never designed to secure and control data sharing. They don't come equipped with like a centralized policy engine that you can enforce, or with any capabilities like UEBA to help set specific controls at a very granular level to safeguard data. From a user's anomalous behavior, like it can be accidental or malicious behavior that causes exfiltration of data and data leaks from your network. So I would say that this is a huge problem with VPNs, that they don't provide granular data protection. I was looking at the Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures Database, or CVE, and was pretty blown away to find out that 733 VPN vulnerabilities have been disclosed in the CVE database till date, with 36 of those being directly tied to data leakage and information disclosure. And to put that into perspective, that stat really should be concerning should be concerning when ransomware attacks, in the context of ransomware attacks, which frequently start with unrestricted access to apps and data, and because ransomware attacks are a top concern for everyone, regardless of the industry they are in or how big their company is. So I would say, just to drive it home, I found a stat from the Verizon DBIR, which says that ransomware is thought to be responsible for nearly a quarter of all global attacks. And VPNs are the biggest threat vector when it comes to enforcing those ransomware attacks.
Yeah, no, I think that stat from the DBIR and that's a great report, is really just is kind of scary. And also looking at the NVD and understanding how many of those vulnerabilities really are tied directly to VPN. I think that's people talk a lot about being able to quantify security risk, and I think that's one way you can do it, is by looking through resources like that and understanding where does this fall on the scale of other solutions we may have, what vulnerabilities exist in those, understanding where those weak points might be. So looks like we're coming up on time here. We got about 5 more minutes, Tricia, but I do want to cover one last thing, which is visibility. And I think that visibility is just so critical, because if you don't know what's going on, you can't even get into road mapping all these access and data protection issues and everything we've already discussed if you don't know what's going on in the first place, right? And I think that that goes for pretty much anything related to security. If you don't see the issue, how can you fix it? So when it comes to visibility, how does that fit into this conversation?
Yeah, that's right, Hank. In the cybersecurity world, we always talk about, you can't protect what you can't see.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the case with VPNs because VPNs don't give admins any visibility into their app landscape or their user behavior or how and where their data is moving. There's absolutely zero visibility. And without that much needed visibility into all of your sanctioned and unsanctioned apps running into your multi cloud environment, it is absolutely impossible for IT and security teams to catalog and assess the apps for risks.
Mm-hmm.
Usually, risk assessment, it's based on factors like regulatory compliance and set industry standards. And if you're not able to understand what your app landscape is looking like, then how do you even assess that landscape for any unforeseen risks, right?
Mm-hmm.
Risk assessment information is absolutely critical to helping organizations uh, in enforcing fail-safe access control policies.
Mm-hmm.
So without being able to do the risk assessment, you are in no way in a position to enforce fail-safe access control policies. Um, these are important when it comes to enhancing app security and protecting against potential threats. Um, VPNs just inherently lack this functionality, and therefore they make it very difficult for network and security teams to effectively secure their organization's private apps and data.
Yeah, well said there for sure. All right, Tricia, this has been an awesome conversation as it always is with you. I guess my final bit would be that, I think that this conversation really highlights some of those limitations with VPNs and some of those challenges providing, as you just mentioned, sort of that incomplete security to apps and data, especially in the context of remote work. And even one thing we didn't talk about today, but is always important to have in this conversation, the use of unmanaged devices as well, something to think about. That could probably be an entire other conversation we can have. But, I think that an important key takeaway, maybe the important key takeaway is that, VPNs are really primarily focusing on network security based on, like you said, implicit trust. And they might not provide that adequate coverage, especially in today's context of that modern kill chain that we've mentioned, really leaving organizations vulnerable to data breaches or compliance issues, like you mentioned. So that's my piece. But Tricia, I want to give you a, last minute, any closing thoughts or advice for the audience?
Well, Hank, I would want to leave the audience with this. For any hybrid work and cloud first organization to stay ahead in the game, secure themselves, it's absolutely crucial for them to adopt a secure remote access strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And it should be a strategy that hinges not only upon securing access, but also prioritizing the safeguarding of sensitive business data, because everything starts and ends with data, and that's what we are all striving to protect at the end of the day. And yeah, so that would be my closing thought on
Got
this
it.
conversation.
Got it. Thank you, Tricia. Yeah, every organization is a data organization, right? That's one way to think about it. So, Tricia, thank you as always. This has been awesome, and thank you to everyone who tuned in. We do these about monthly, so look for them. Look for us coming live on the Lookout channel. We cover all sorts of topics, across data protection, mobile security, threat intelligence. Today we talked about ZTNA. We may talk about cloud data security, whatever it may be, right? We cover everything. So please tune in the future. If you want to learn more about what we talked about today, there's a link in the post. Have a look at that. Just takes you to a nice one pager. And we hope to see you soon on the next Talk Data to Me. Thanks, everyone.